We have a question at table 1, and there's one at table 11. I don't think we're going to get back to table 25.
Yeah, hi. Charles Menzies here as part of, I guess, the Kakatla delegation. But my question or comment it comes to the idea of sort of spreading pieces and parts around. I mean, for example, Kakatla nations engaged in at least 5 environmental assessments. Some are joint level, some are provincial, some are federal. Then there's these kinds of processes that are sort of large region-wide. And so there's a whole range of pull and pressure about where to be and what to do. But in the addition, when you hear about the Working Group on Marine Traffic as sort of going ahead as a kind of pilot process to kind of test the things, but I think it would be fair to say that from the hereditary leadership and the political leadership in Kakatla, marine traffic is probably a really serious issue that I think it would be fair to suggest would be something that they would want to actually be seen in the wider process. The whole discussion about, and if I'm understanding the Marine Working Group in the marine traffic discussion correctly, this is something that really has a possibility to impact seriously on Kakatla territory. With the port expansion that's going ahead, they mentioned also about issues of air quality control, how in the environmental assessment process those parameters are being constrained, they're being used as point source as opposed to cumulative effect and movement of vessels. With the Enbridge project that's being proposed and the movement of large-scale vessels carrying oil and et cetera through this area, as well as was mentioned the other day about cruise ship traffic going by in various places and dumping waste in the water and these sort of long-term cumulative effects. So if that is what is part of the Marine Traffic Working Group, I think it would be fair to say that from the political leadership and the hereditary leadership in Kakatla would probably have some serious questions to raise about that. Now, it's not my place to make a statement about that, merely to raise that as an issue that would be something of concern through the environmental assessment processes and then how that interacts with this kind of process as well. So it is, I understand the difficulties that come with many different processes, different types of processes in place, and we have a whole range of different things happening simultaneously in different levels. But there does need to be some way in which there's clear sort of direction and some kind of moving forward toward consistency, because it clearly is a serious issue, and the potential implications of kind of testing it on something like this because it might seem to be a necessity. And my sense, my personal sense, is this is pressure from large corporate best interests that have projects impending or immediate that want to have something cleared so they can move through the process without necessarily being infringed upon in how they would see it by a large-scale, large-region planning process.
Are you seeking a response from somebody?
I think it's a statement, but I mean, I certainly would appreciate hearing either an assurance that my understanding, or at least is not quite correct, or an assurance of how this would link in, and that, in addition to these other processes that we're currently involved in, would be controlled.
Can anybody comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great statement, Charles, and it certainly, I think, speaks to the evolution of the Marine Transportation Working Group and why marine transportation was put forward as the first working group, and that urgency and that direction really came from the First Nation side of it. Originally, we had talked about, well, let's address marine transportation outside of PNCIMA because we don't want to get bogged down in a long, drawn-out planning process. We need to deal with this right now. And through the partnership we have with the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, in discussions with Transport Canada itself, it was has evolved into, well, let's make it the first pilot project because it does need that linkage to a PNCIMA. But there is a sense of urgency behind that working group, and that's why it's been put forward as the first one. And certainly there's a lot of more details I can go into about how First Nations on the coast and how we've organized and how we're trying to maximize our efficiencies around capacity and getting that technical information, getting that stuff out to the individual communities so that they can start to arm themselves with information science, local knowledge, to start making their own decisions on what happens with that issue. I hope that kind of speaks to your statement and that.
Thanks, Bruce. I think in fairness to Table 11, we better let them ask their brief question.
Yeah, thank you. Des Nobles again. I'm sorry, guys, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question on behalf of my community specifically and the constituents that I represent. Is there still a possibility of having community represented on the Secretariat? Or if not, is there a possibility of establishing some sort of a community caucus that would have either parallel or joint operations?
Well, I know Des quite well, so I don't feel bad in saying no to your first part. I mean, in seriousness though, I think people get an understanding of that special relationship of First Nations, and it's really important to us that we're recognized at this kind of government-to-government level. Alex talked about it, how we've been ignored, we haven't been listened to, and things like that. And I can go on and on and on, but I'm not going to. But the second part of your question is can we find some other alternatives around a community caucus or something like that? I'm totally open to that. And I think the First Nations in the North Coast would be totally open to having those kind of dialogues. It doesn't have to be formal, it can be formal, but you know, and I talked about it yesterday, we have started to develop some of those relationships with local government and local First Nations that we can start using those tables or those forums to start addressing some of these issues. I mean, you look at it, right? You look at the geography. All of our First Nation communities on the North Coast, in one way or another, have to go through Prince Rupert, right? And we have a lot of our members from Metlakatla, Loch Wallams, Kitkatla, who live in Prince Rupert. So it's kind of another one of our unofficial or official Tsimshian communities, Prince Rupert. So it's vitally important that we make those connections and keep nurturing and developing our relationships with the locals in Prince Rupert.